All right. Hey there, guys. Charles with Doves Media. And today we're going to be talking about why I think the vast majority of photographers should start with this lens if they're into portrait and headshot work. Stay tuned. All right. So I want to break this video down into three different facets and why I think most photographers should pick up this lens if they're shooting portraits or anything. Um, Ultimately, the cost on this lens right now, the prices online have it at about 370 new, 200 to 220 used, somewhere in there. Um, we compare that to something like the 85 1.2, that's running about $1,900 at this point. So the price to value ratio is incredible with this lens. It really does produce beautiful images, um, and I really don't have any complaints about what it's produced so far. Do I know the 85 1.2 might produce a little better images and look sharper and a little better? Yes, it's almost a cult favorite. That lens is beautiful and it's amazing. However, for the $1,900 price point, you got to sell a lot of headshots and a lot of portrait sessions to make up the difference between these two. So that means that you've got to really put that lens to work in order to just pay for that lens itself. Um, Ultimately, you could pick up something like this and a nifty 50 and then have a couple different focal ranges that you can play with and kind of figure out which ones that you like. So that kind of brings me to my first point, is just the focal range itself. Now, if you watch any of my other videos, you know that I shoot a crop sensor. Started with the T5i, now at the 70D. And so on a crop sensor, this has an effective focal range of right around 135 millimeter, which is still a good portrait focal range. You'll find that the 135 Canon L lens right now is still one that many photographers use for portrait lenses. Um, but with that effective focal range, I know a lot of people would compare it and say, hey, why wouldn't I go with something like the Nifty 50 or the 51.8 in order to get an effective focal range of somewhere around 85, 87, somewhere around in there. That's the focal range that you're ultimately trying to get with an 85 millimeter. And I would say that it's great, go for it. Buy both of them. That way you have the option to shoot either one if you're in a portrait session and you want a little bit wider focal range. However, it's something that I think that a lot of people don't really talk about too much, but you do multiply the effective focal range and the aperture to a crop sensor when you're putting it on a crop sensor body, but the lens compression, the rendering on the background, the compression on your subject is still at an 85 millimeter, even though it's on a crop sensor camera. And so if you were to say put these at the same distance and take a shot with both the 50 1.8 and this, you're going to notice a difference in your bokeh. You're going to notice a difference in the compression of the background objects. And so still shooting with an 85 millimeter, you just have to make sure that you do a little bit more work and you step back. You have a little more room to work when you're dealing with your subject in order to get a nice picture with something like this. But it's still, the compression that it gives is great. I love that. I love the 85 compression ratio. Um, and so you will notice that they look very different. And so I'll throw up some photos now when I kind of compare, and I'll take the exact same photo with a 50 millimeter 1.8 and an 85 millimeter 1.8 at the same focal range, and then I will put them at a different portion or at a different distance to make sure that we kind of line up the images, and you'll see that the compression is different in each one of those images. So I've got two photos here, both taken with my Canon T5i here, and on the left here we've got the 50-1.8, and on the right we've got the 85-1.8. And as you can see here, I tried to make them relatively the same size in the frame here, but there is a difference in compression between the two photos. If we go back here to the boat and we zoom in here, the 85-1.8 here, the bokeh is a lot more choppy and blocky, whereas on the 85, it's a lot more blurred, more straight up and down, not as rounded. If we zoom out and zoom into some place like this, you notice the bokeh there, that's a lot smoother here. So it's just out of focus completely. So you notice the size and the compression here. Even notice my wife's face here. Though relatively the same size in the frame, the compression is different at 50 millimeters than it is at 85 millimeters. So now that we've taken a look at that and we've looked at the compression that you're getting out of this lens and why you, for the cost, should probably pick up both lenses so you have both lenses to go with. Um, this this lens to me, I think, is better for a beginning photographer, or even an intermediate one like I would consider myself. Um, Ultimately, the cost that you're spending on going to like an 85 1.2 or even the new Sigma, I think, is like $1,300, somewhere in there. You're going to get a lot more work out of something like this, I believe. At least for me personally, you're going to bang this thing around. I know that was a big thing for me when I first started in buying lenses. I was really worried about, beating up my lenses, and whether they would last and taking care of them. And so starting with something like this, you worry a little less than you do if you spend $1,900 on a lens. The second thing that it allows you is you got to keep in mind that making it as a photographer is not an easy gig. And so you need to watch your costs when you first start. And ultimately, you'll realize that you change a lot in the way you look at things. And when I first started shooting photography, I thought it was all about zooms. I wanted zooms for everything. A 2.8 zoom was what I was looking for. And now I've kind of graduated to, I prefer the look of primes. And so had I spent a ton of money on zoom lenses, I wouldn't have a lot of money to come back and buy some of the primes that I want. And so if you think about your costs and managing your expenses when you're starting out, you can get very good images that your clients are going to love out of this lens. Yes, the images will look better out of the 85 1.2, but you will still get images that you can deliver to your clients and they're going to love, because it's more about capturing the moment and capturing the feel than it is whether your customer is going to look at a little bit different bokeh in the background of their image compared to, say, somebody that shot with a 1.2. They're not going to compare that bokeh. They're not going to look at them side by side. You will notice the difference because you're looking at it, I guess, is the best way of putting on it. And then ultimately, when if you decide that you want to sell this, you could still sell this off, like I said, right now for about 200 or 220 bucks. And so you've gotten a good amount of images. You've found out that the 85 millimeter focal range is something that you really like to shoot. That is another key point, is making sure that you find the focal range that you really like to shoot with your camera. And that's why having a 50 and an 85, 100 millimeter, even a 24 millimeter, or a 40 millimeter, play with them all. You can get a lot of them relatively inexpensively, and test them out when you're shooting and find out what focal range you really want to invest your money in for portraits. And you'll be better off in the end, because you'll get the kind of looks and images that you're looking for, because you've kind of tested and found out which focal ranges you really like to shoot. I started with a nifty 50 and I shot that a lot. I did graduate to this one and shot this one a little bit more, but I still find myself going back to the 50 for certain things too. Even the 24 millimeter for a little wider angle of things. So I mean, you'll find yourself kind of bouncing around, and so to outlay that kind of money for one lens when you're just getting started, or you're trying to figure out how to build out your kit, I just don't know that it's the best decision for a lot of photographers. Now, if you've got a lot of money and you're going full bore at it and you want the best image quality possible and you're going to charge the highest prices, then definitely by all means go for the 1.2. It's a better lens in almost every regard. But you could get several different focal ranges to kind of test around and play around with for vastly the same cost. If you compare, so this is at 370, The 85 or the 50 Nifty 50 is at like 125. You get the 24 millimeter at 150. You can get the 40 millimeter for another 150 or so, somewhere in there. You can get the 10 to 18. I think that's somewhere in the 300 range or so right now. So you can kind of play around with the wide angle of things. But you could have a 24, a 40, a 50, and an 85 all for less money than just buying the 185 millimeter. So, and once you decide that you want to kind of take that next level, you could still only sell this off and you've only lost about 150 bucks or so. So I think that presents a far better value for most photographers than trying to get the best lens right off the bat. So as always, guys, if you like the content I'm creating, please hit the like button below. Subscribe, put some comments down there and let me know if you like the content that I'm creating here. And as always, guys, just get out there and shoot.